Hello YouTube, Dave here again. Today we are continuing our look at the Ranger class through the ages. Today we are focusing on 2nd edition Advanced Dungeons & Dragons. For this video I am using the 2013 reprint of the 95 black covered reprints or redesigns of the Player's Handbook. If you're interested in learning more about 2nd edition or picking up these books, you can get the reprint versions print on demand through DM's Guild and Drive-Thru-RPG. There are links in the description below if you want to check those out. 2nd edition is where I first started my journey into the Dungeons & Dragons or the tabletop role-playing game hobby, but I never got a chance to play the Ranger. I played a fighter and I played a wizard, and I think those are the only two classes I ever actually got to play in 2nd edition. So it's going to be really cool to actually take a look at the Ranger class. So starting off, one of the things that is worth noting in 2nd edition AD&D is that your different classes are actually grouped together. They're usually like variants of a larger class. So for example, the Thief and the Bard are now considered to be the Rogue class, and they're just variants or subclasses of the Rogue. And for the Ranger, they are a part of the Warrior class, along with the Fighter and the Paladin. So that's actually going to mean a couple of changes right off the bat for the Ranger compared to the 1st edition AD&D version. For example, we are no longer rolling d8s for hit dice for the Ranger. The Rangers, Fighters, and Paladins all roll d10s now. The 1st edition Ranger also rolled 2 hit dice at 1st level. Again, they all roll the same way now, so they are only rolling a single hit die at 1st. It's a d10 now, and they cap off at 9 hit dice at 9th level, versus the Ranger being able to get up to 11 hit dice at 10th level in 1st edition AD&D. After 9th level, so 10th level and every level thereafter, they simply add 3 hit points to their total. And again, with AD&D or the older versions of the D&D game, when you had a higher constitution score, your hit point adjustment only applied to the levels where you're rolling hit dice. So Rangers could add their con modifier to their hit dice for all the way up to level 9, and then when they're gaining just the +3 hit points, they're only gaining the +3 hit points regardless of how high their constitution score is. So to be a Ranger, you have to have the following requirements. You have to have a 13 strength, a 13 dexterity, a 14 constitution, and a 14 wisdom. So this again makes it one of the harder classes to qualify for, because you have to have above average stats for 4 out of the 6 attributes. The only 2 that aren't included are intelligence and charisma. I don't think anything really required charisma, except for maybe the Bard. In first, no, it's actually the Paladin required charisma too. I guess I take that back. Strength, dexterity, and wisdom are their prime requisites. So if, as it says down here, a Ranger who has strength, dex, and wisdom of 16 or more gains a +10 bonus on experience points, 10% bonus, I should say, on experience points. This is worded so much better than the 1st edition version, where it said that they had to have more than a 15 in those attributes, which meant 16. I don't know why they worded it the way they did back then, but saying that they need to have a 16 or more is a lot better and a lot less confusing than saying that they have to have greater than 15. I know it doesn't sound like that's that confusing, but I do remember having a conversation with a player that wanted to play a Ranger in 1st edition and was curious as to how they got the bonus experience. So I like the fact that they actually changed the wording for that. Another interesting change here, as far as the races allowed, in 1st edition AD&D, only humans and half-elves could be Rangers, but in 2nd edition, the elf can now be a Ranger as well, which is interesting because in later editions, Elven Rangers is usually the primary thing that comes to mind when you think of the Ranger class. This was the version that first allowed you to actually be a Ranger as an elf. Now, because they are a warrior class, Rangers do have proficiency in all armors like they did in 1st edition AD&D. However, in 2nd edition, it says here that the Ranger can use any weapon and wear any armor. Several of his special abilities are usable only when wearing studded leather or lighter armor. So this is the first version of the Ranger class to basically say that if you're wearing a heavier type of armor, you don't have access to your ranger abilities. So they're still proficient in them, which is a weird design choice in my opinion. But if they're wearing studded leather, or I think like padded armor, then they get the full range of their abilities. Otherwise, they basically just they're basically just a fighter. So I don't know why, if you played a ranger, you would ever want to wear anything heavier than studded leather, but you have the option. It just really handicaps your class quite a bit if you do that. Now, if the ranger is wearing studded leather or lighter armor, they gain the benefits of two-weapon fighting. So in 2nd edition AD&D, characters can fight with two weapons, one in each hand. There are some restrictions, so the primary weapon has to be larger than the offhand weapon. So like longsword, short sword, or short sword, dagger. Now, if you're dual wielding daggers, that's fine. The dagger is considered light enough that if you're fighting with a dagger in each hand, there's no effects. It doesn't affect your ability to do two-weapon fighting. But normally there are penalties. So a typical character fighting with two weapons would suffer a -2 penalty on their primary attack and a -4 penalty on their offhand weapon. But with the 2nd edition version of the Ranger class, if they're wearing studded leather or lighter armor, they can do two-weapon fighting with 0 penalties. I'll talk more about that in a moment when I get to my thoughts on the class, but I'm glad to see that they actually get a really tangible benefit for two-weapon fighting in this version of the game. Also, if they are wearing studded leather or lighter armor, they do have the ability to hide in shadows and move silently. They can do it in natural terrain, and if they do so, like basically in an outdoor setting, they get to use the percentage bonuses here, or the percentage chances here on table 18. So at first level, they would get a 10% chance to hide in shadows, 15% chance to move silently, and their dexterity, if they have a high enough dexterity, will modify those percentage chances. So it starts off pretty low, but it does get to be actually somewhat usable or decent as they progress through their levels. Also, in their roles as protectors of good, rangers tend to focus their efforts against some particular creature, usually one that marauds their homeland. So before advancing to 2nd level, every ranger must select a species enemy. Typical enemies include giants, orcs, lizardmen, trolls, or ghouls. You'll notice that giants are now separated from the other options because in 1st edition, the giant class had a huge list of things that would qualify for it, including like orcs, goblins, kobolds, hobgoblins, gnolls, trolls, ogre, mages. Now it is much more narrowly focused. So if you took giants, it would be against like actual giants, cyclops, hill giants, storm giants, fire giants, that kind of thing. If you wanted it to be like trolls, then it would be specifically trolls. So it is a much more narrow version. Now in 1st edition, they're what I'm going to call favorite enemy. They didn't have a term for it. Even in 2nd edition, they don't really have a term for it. But it's what we know as favorite enemy. In 1st edition, they added +1 damage for every level that the ranger had. So a 10th level ranger would add 10 points of damage when attacking their favorite enemy. In 2nd edition, it has been changed. So in 2nd edition, instead of it being a bonus to damage, their very specific choice, so again, a singular species that they choose, they get to now add a +4 bonus to attack rolls. So it's attack rolls only, no modification to damage. However, because they're kind of like their sworn enemy, rangers have a hard time playing nice with their favorite enemy in this version of the game. So they actually suffer a -4 penalty on encounter reactions to essentially be civil and not just want to launch into attacking them. So, for example, if you chose orcs as your favorite enemy, again, they don't have the term for it, but we're just going to say, words are hard, we're just going to say favorite enemy for the purposes of making it easy to sort of get the idea across. So if you chose orcs and you come across an orc camp and the rest of the party wants to be diplomatic, the ranger is going to have a tough time doing so. Also in combat, if a member of their hated species that they have sworn an oath against, their favorite enemy, if they're in the combat, the ranger will usually seek them out first unless something is clearly a much greater threat. So if you chose orcs, for example, and the orcs were being led by an ogre, you might be able to get away with targeting the ogre, but you're more likely to want to go after the orcs first. If the orcs were being led by a human, you would definitely go after the orcs first, but if the orcs were being led by, say, a dragon, you would probably be able to attack the dragon first. But I do like the fact that when you choose a favorite enemy, the game really tries to make sure that you're, basically living out the role playing out the fact that these are your sworn enemies and you want to take them out before anything else. So I think that's actually kind of a cool ability. In this version of the game, Rangers are also adept at both trained and untrained creatures. So essentially they have like a wild empathy ability. If it's a domesticated or sort of a not really an aggressive type of creature, the ranger can just automatically form like a bond of friendship with them, and they can sort of cooperate with one another. If it's a wild animal or one that's trained to attack, the creature has to make a saving throw. If they fail the saving throw, then the ranger's wild empathy forms a bond between them and they sort of like become allies, or the ranger can sort of calm them down. So if like a boar comes charging out of the brush and starts attacking the party, the ranger can try to calm it. Because it's a wild and aggressive animal, the boar would have to make a saving throw, but if it fails the saving throw, then it sort of calms down and the ranger is able to not really command it, but it is able to form, like I said, a bond of friendship and sort of cool the situation off, which again, I think it's really cool because the Rangers are meant to be these like woodsman type of characters now. They really do sort of play up the ability for animal empathy and affinity, which again, I think is a really cool option. Now a Ranger can learn pre-spells, but in second edition, pre-spells, you don't have like a cleric spell list and a druid spell list like you did in first edition. Spells are broken down into spheres, and they're sort of themed spells where they would share sort of a common theme between them. So the ranger can only learn spells from the plant or animal sphere. So being able to speak with animals or control plants, things like entangle, those are the kind of spells that the ranger would be able to do, but that's the only spheres that they can choose. So things like healing or divination or anything else along those lines, the ranger cannot learn any of those spells or cannot cast any of those spells. They start gaining their spells at 8th level. And like I said, it is a bit of a limited choice, and we'll talk about the spell casting as we progress through the different editions. But it is definitely a step back, and we'll talk more about that as we sort of go through. So Rangers can build castles, forts, and strongholds, but they don't gain any special followers. That's the same way that it worked in first edition as well. At 10th level, a Ranger does attract 2d6 followers. These followers might be normal humans, but they are often animals or even strange denizens of the land. And the DM will basically give you the list of what followers you attract based off of the different chart that we have here. And then finally, like a paladin, a ranger has a code of behavior. So rangers have to be good aligned in second edition AD&D like they had to be good aligned in first edition. If they willingly choose to commit an evil act, they immediately lose their ranger class, and they're considered to be fighters of the same level. Now, rangers and fighters do progress at different rates of experience points. So when the ranger changes their class or changes their alignment and loses the ranger class, they lose any experience points that they had in excess of the minimum amount that they would need to be a fighter of the same level. So we'll just take a quick look at the experience chart here. So let's just say we were a 5th level ranger. So at level 5, the ranger gains that at 18,000 experience points. A fighter would gain 5th level at 16,000 experience points. Now the fighter also gains 6th level at 32,000 experience points, but the ranger takes 36,000. So let's just say that the ranger was a 5th level ranger, but they had like 35,000 experience points. They commit an evil act willingly, and they lose their ranger class, and they become a 5th level fighter. Now, Fighters gain 6th level at 32,000. So if they kept their experience points, they would technically gain a level from losing their ranger status. And these games did not reward you in any way, shape, or form for changing your alignment. So because they were 5th level, the ranger who commits an evil act loses their ranger status and becomes effectively a fighter. They would drop all the way down to 16,000 experience points. So they would lose 19,000 experience points because they committed an evil act. So again, losing your class, changing your alignment back in these days was not something to be taken lightly. So that was the Ranger class. Now I don't unfortunately have very many books for 2nd edition AD&D, so I don't have the complete Ranger's Handbook, for example. I can't really talk about the options that were in there like I did with the Unearthed Arcana from the 1st edition version of the Ranger class. So at this point, I'll just say if any of you watching have the complete Ranger's Handbook, please feel free in the comment section below to discuss some of the new options or alternate features that they give the Ranger class from that book. I would love to see that. And if I ever do add that book to my collection, I will be sure to make sort of an update video where I go over some of those options. So I can really only talk about the core version here. But overall, the Ranger class is very interesting in 2nd edition. It reminds me a little bit of the Bard class because the Bard in 1st edition AD&D was pretty overpowered. It was difficult to qualify for, but once you got there, you were a pretty tough character and you could do basically anything. In 2nd edition, the Bard got really completely nerfed almost into oblivion, to the point where I don't know anyone that played a 2nd edition AD&D Bard, and it became like the laughingstock of D&D classes really up until like 4th and 5th edition D&D. The Ranger class is definitely nerfed from 1st edition, but it didn't get it quite as bad. And I will say that the things that they add to the Ranger class, I'm completely and totally on board for. I love the fact that they put more of the focus on the agile, stealthy, maneuverable version of the Ranger, the more nature-oriented version of the Ranger class. I think that that is absolutely awesome. It's the version of the class that I like the most. The woodsman, you know, the outdoor survivalist type of character. The ability to be stealthy, I think, is great, even though the bonuses or the percentage chances are pretty weak up until like 7th, 8th, or 9th level. But it is still great that they actually have the ability to do that. I like the fact that, again, you're looking at the studded leather or lighter armor because you're supposed to be dexterous, you're supposed to be maneuverable, you don't want things hampering you, and I love the fact that we have the 2-weapon fighting version of the class now. In 1st edition, they didn't have any of those abilities. What they did have, though, was, you know, they could wear any armor and it didn't impede them in any way, shape, or form. I do like the fact that it's like, you know, because you're trained as a warrior, technically you can wear these heavier armors, but there is a trade-off for that. And I think that's kind of interesting. I will still say, though, I think it would have been just better overall if they simply said that the Ranger is proficient in studded leather or lighter armors and that be it. And then say that if they train or become proficient in heavier armors, they, you know, can wear them, but they don't gain the benefits of several of their Ranger abilities. I don't know. We'll talk more about that when we get to the next edition for sure. But I think it's a weird thing because I think it's because it's a warrior class and the warriors are proficient in all armor and all weapons. So I think that's just the reason that they can still wear heavier armors. But I do like the fact that they try to steer them towards the lighter armors here. Like I said, 2-weapon fighting is awesome. It is probably the best version of the 2-weapon fighting Ranger class that we will, well, up until like maybe the newer version of the game, it's the best version that we'll see for many, many years as far as this Through the Ages series go. I'm not going to get too much into later like 3rd edition Rangers, but we'll remember the 2-weapon fighting abilities of the 2nd edition Ranger when we start talking about the 3rd edition one. The biggest things for me that I think they really way overcorrected on here They sort of like over course corrected. They went a little too far with dialing back. The relative power of the first edition Ranger lies in their spellcasting and in their favorite enemy ability. The spellcasting, like I said, you could get some really good combination of spells in first edition because there were no restrictions. It was just the druid list up to 3rd level and up to 2nd level wizard spells or magic user spells. So you could have, invisibility, you could have a ranger using magic missile. There was all kinds of great things that you could do with ranger spellcasting. Even though they didn't get a ton of spells, there was a really interesting choices for the types of spells that you could cast. In 2nd edition, though, because they used the spheres, which is a way of like theming spells into much smaller lists, plant and animal, there's not a ton of stuff that you can really do with that. I think you might get like sticks to snakes, but mostly it's like summon animal or things like entangle or spells like that. The spell casting aspect of the Ranger in 2nd edition, I don't think was really something that people were overly enthusiastic about. It was something like, oh yeah, okay, you get a couple of spells, but your choices are really really limited. In fact, I'm just going to see here if they have the sphere list. So just give me a moment here, and we'll take a look, see if we can find that. Oh, that was easy. So here are the list here, the spheres. So for the Ranger, they can choose animal or they can choose plant. Now remember, they only get up to 3rd level spells, so there's not a ton of stuff they can do here. So animal sphere spells that a ranger will be able to cast. And I'm only going to talk about the ones that they can cast. So animal friendship, invisibility to animals, locate animals or plants, charm person or mammal, so that's actually not bad. Messenger, snake charm, speak with animals, hold animal, and summon insects. Those are the 1st through 3rd level animal sphere spells. For plant sphere, you've got entangle, which, not a bad one. Pass without trace, which can be useful. Shillelagh, which just modifies the damage of your, like a wooden, you basically turn a stick into like a cudgel kind of thing. Bark skin, goodberry, trip, warp wood, plant growth, snare, spike growth, and tree. I don't know what does tree do. Let's go down this rabbit hole a little bit, shall we? So that is a 3rd level pre-spell. Also absent from their list is the ability to summon animals. That is a 4th level spell. So they can't even get the ability to summon an animal. All right, so tree. So plant sphere. By means of the spell, the caster is able to assume the form of a small living tree or shrub, or that of a large dead tree trunk with only a few limbs. Although the closest inspection cannot reveal that this plant is actually a person, and for all normal tests, he is, in fact, a tree or shrub. The caster is able to observe. So basically, you just become a tree and you can spy on things. It's interesting, I guess, but yeah, there's not a ton of spells that would really be overly useful. I think like entangle, bark skin, and like pass without trace are probably the best spells they have there. There's no healing spells whatsoever except for like goodberry, which you have a certain number of berries that you can imbue magical energy into, and each berry will heal a single point of damage. It's good in a pinch, and it can stabilize a dying character, but it's just the spell casting aspect of the Ranger, not that great. And then the favorite enemy. The favorite enemy is, again, one of the biggest nerfs that the Ranger class gets. And favorite enemy, again, they don't call it that in the early games. They didn't really have phrases or terms or titles for most of their abilities, but it's favorite enemy for all intents and purposes. And we'll see that favorite enemy varies in usefulness from edition to edition. The 1st edition version with the giant class humanoids and the large list of creatures that included, and being able to add your level to damage in versions of the game where creatures didn't have like ridiculous amounts of hit points. It's actually a really, really powerful ability. So powerful, in fact, I understand the fact that they wanted to scale it back some, but man, did they overdo it here. A +4 bonus to hit is okay. And I think they went with the attack bonus because you're getting the extra attack now from the 2-up and fighting. But the Ranger 2-up and fighting, there's no penalties, so they don't really necessarily need the bonus, and they have to have a decent strength, which means they're already likely getting some form of bonus to attack just from their strength alone. And they have the Warrior's attack progression, which is the best in the game. So sure, anytime that you get bonuses to hit is great, but it's just nowhere near as good as the bonus to damage, especially considering the fact that you are now very narrowly focused on what creatures you can actually get that bonus to. Like I said, you're choosing a specific species now and not a broader category. So the giant class humanoids is no longer an option. If you choose giant, then it is only specifically giants, which is hill giant, stone giant, fire giant, so on. Like I think it includes the Cyclops and maybe the ogre, but like if you wanted to be able to apply that to trolls, which you used to be able to do in first edition, that's no longer an option if you choose giant. If you want to attack or get the bonus on trolls, you have to specifically choose troll. So it is much more narrowly focused, which is where the damage bonus would actually make a decent amount of sense, because you're not going to be using it that often, especially at higher levels, unless you really choose your choice of, favorite enemy at first level, or at low levels, and choose things that you're probably not going to fight until the end of the campaign. But for the most part, you're probably choosing things like orcs or maybe ogres, goblins, that kind of thing, to benefit from early on, especially because that +4 bonus is a lot better at low levels than it is at the higher levels where you've already got tons of things that are modifying your attack roll anyway. So again, it's a way, way, way overcorrection from what we had in first edition. And it's a bit of a shame because if they would have had it be a bonus to damage, like +4 to damage, or even if it was just like +2 to damage or something, I think it still would have been better than the attack bonus. Or if the attack bonus was meant to offset the penalty for 2-up and fighting, I guess that would have been fine as well. But the Ranger already doesn't have penalties for 2-up and fighting unless they're wearing armor so heavy that it removes their ability to use their class features anyway. So it's not likely that's going to be the case. It's a good class, and I love the shift towards the more nature-oriented version of the Ranger based on, compared to the first edition one, which was essentially a tracker, and that was kind of the majority of their woodland abilities. So they definitely made some really cool choices, and it is, becoming the Ranger class that we know now. But there are some baffling decisions that they made, like the really weakening their spellcasting, is one thing, and their favorite enemy ability is something that's just not that great overall. It would have been nice to see something a little bit more, in line with what they had before, even if it was a fixed bonus and never changed, or something like, it would be like an extra point of damage for every 2 or every 3 levels or something like that. I think would have been better, but it is what it is. It's still a great class. I still love it. But you can see that they were like, "Ooh, this is kind of overpowered in first edition, so we gotta change that." And then they got a little overly ambitious when it came to correcting some of those issues. But still, like I said, a pretty solid class overall. So let me know in the comments below. Again, if you have the Ranger's Handbook for 2nd edition, let me know some of the cool stuff in that book if you have it. Otherwise, just let me know any of your experiences with the Ranger class in 2nd edition AD&D. If you had played 1st edition and you went into 2nd edition, were you happy that now elves could finally be Rangers, or did that not really mean anything to you at the time? Did you play a Ranger? Did you have Rangers in your group? Did you take advantage of the fact that Rangers were no longer limited to only 3 Rangers ever working together at a time? Or, again, was that just a non-factor for you? Let me know in the comments below some of your cool 2nd edition AD&D Ranger-based experiences. Anyway, thank you guys very much for watching. I do appreciate it. And I will see you all next time when we take a look at the first version of the Ranger class I ever played when we go to 3rd edition Dungeons and Dragons. Until then, though, Thanks again for your support. If you want to check out the 2nd edition Player's Handbook, you can find it on DM's Guild and DriveThruRPG. And again, thank you guys very much for watching. Until next time, take care.